This is System Crash, a weekly tech news show willing to tell the hard truths about how tech and the titans who own and operate it is really transforming the world. I'm Paris Marks.
And I'm Brian Merchant.
Brian, not a great start to 2025 down there in Los Angeles, I hear.
Yeah, it could be better. Could be better. I'm looking out my window at the plume of smoke that is rising over Pacific Palisades, which is a few neighborhoods over from where I live and which is currently on fire. Yeah, it's closer than it usually gets. You know, we have fires like this every couple years, especially sort of like the Malibu area, which is, there's a bunch of canyons and it's hilly and it's dry, so it's really easy to spark fire. But this is particularly bad this time. I think we still don't really know how it got started, but Pacific Palisades is kind of like a ritzy, sort of coast-adjacent neighborhood that's kind of north of Venice and Santa Monica, kind of over by Westwood, and it's been evacuated. I think like 80,000 people have been evacuated. Public school, at least I think one school, maybe a public or a charter school, has burned down. A bunch of buildings, a bunch of restaurants have burned down. The first time I really encountered this was like the big Malibu fire. You folks might remember those apocalyptic images of like the fires coming down the coastline. And I have really strong memories of that because that was the same week that my son was born, and we brought him home from the hospital, and like ash was raining from the sky. And
No way.
yeah, literally raining from the sky, the ash from the forest fires. So like we, live in a place where this is happening with increasing frequency, thanks to climate change, of course. And yeah, that was cause for a lot of reflection for me and for many others. And, the last 2 years we've been kind of fortunate that there's been more rain. So I feel like it was out of sight for a lot of myself more than I'd like to admit. But now we're back to another dry year where there's just been like 0.16 inches of rainfall in LA since July. So just nothing really. And then it's just like a tinderbox when these winds are blowing. Like, it's crazy. I was just out walking around, before we started recording. And yeah, you want some dystopian apocalyptic imagery. Just walk around West LA right now and you can watch a Waymo car kind of driving by with nobody in it through a haze of wildfire smoke, and the sun blotted out by dark clouds.
The real image of like climate tech dystopia right there.
Yeah, the real image of, like this is when the system crashes for too long, like this becomes, ordinary. And you can maybe hear that I'm not sick, but I'm a little stuffy because the Santa Ana winds dried me out. And then this morning I've been just breathing in particulate smoke. So bear with me a little bit if my words get stuck in my throat. But, this is all, I think, related, and what a way to start talking about 2025 with this as sort of the backdrop, like a real and present sort of indicator of the climate crisis that we have just done nothing really seriously to ameliorate since the last time one of these major sort of wildfires like enveloped my neighboring community. So we're at a time when AI companies and the big tech companies are buying up, more and more servers to just crank up more and more compute to make, automating software. And we're seeing sort of gas-fired power plants that otherwise would have maybe been decommissioned or transitioned away. There's that big Bloomberg story last year, but kept online so that they can fire. So it's just part of the configuration. Obviously data centers and AI are not the cause of this. It's a legacy of industrialization, of just reliance on fossil fuels and refusing to turn away. California, for as progressive as it's commonly thought of, has its own, deep legacy of oil drilling and oil refining and, the car culture and relying on gas.
LA is like the picture of that. Yeah.
LA is the picture of that.
Yeah.
Now it's, thanks to the California Air and Resource Board and the efforts to clamp down on emissions, LA doesn't look like the smoggy hellhole that it, did 20 years ago. I still remember when I was a kid taking a family vacation to LA, like it was striking even in like the early 2000s. Like just a regular day, the sky would just be, choked with smog.
It feels fascinating how quickly we can like forget that,
Yeah.
forget that that used to exist, that before these regulations on the tailpipe, like, we had all this smog and, it was regulations that like cleaned that up.
Well, and now, I mean, right? Like that's a through line to like today, where like every other summer, the skies are choked by wildfire smoke because of the failure to constructively engage in a different kind of regulation to, ramp down fossil fuels. And we have this tinderbox climate now.
You get rid of the car smog and then it's now replaced with wildfire smoke. And,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
Jesus,
LA
man.
just, I guess insists on being a fixture of dystopia in one way or another.
Yeah, we get fires up here, like, in Canada, but on our coast, it's more like hurricanes that we watch. And, you can see them coming like for ages, right? And you can kind of prepare for them because of the way that this all works. But I felt for me, as I was watching this, maybe I just don't pay attention enough to the fires that happen down there, but it was striking how quickly it seemed to all develop and for the fire to really take off. And, I'm just happy to hear that you and your family are safe, and hopefully that remains the case.
Yeah, as long as the wind isn't sort of enveloping us in smoke. So we're like right now, like it's really interesting to look out of our sort of window, and I go out on our street because we're about 3 miles, 3 to 5 miles away from the evacuation zone. But the winds are blowing so strong that like there's this like sort of band of blue sky, and then like the smoke is kind of sitting on top of it and blowing it out. And a friend of mine had to leave his house in Venice, which is just a couple miles away from here, because the smoke was so thick it's being blown along the coast. So it's like it really just kind of depends on where you are. And yeah, so we're all right. We're inland enough. We're in sort of the city of LA. If a wildfire reaches here, it would be truly unprecedented. It would be like this sort of cataclysmic and catastrophic event. Not that it isn't already catastrophic. It is.
Yeah, well, we're recording this on Wednesday. I hope Friday when it comes out, we can still say you're outside the evacuation zone.
Yes, otherwise this will be the last remaining document audio. But you gotta podcast through it. I think
Totally.
This is 2025. What else are we doing if not creating a little content?
Podcasting through dystopia. That's how it works.
That can be our tagline for 2025. Yeah.
Speaking of dystopias, I think there are many different aspects of this where we can see the tech industry kind of turning our world into this complete mess. We often talk about Elon Musk because, of the power that he holds. But this week we've seen Mark Zuckerberg, return to his leading role as a real harbinger of dystopia, at least on social media. And, I think some of the things that we're going to be seeing over the next few years, as this kind of tech oligarchy that we have embraces the Trump administration and, the kind of right-wing perspectives on tech that they have. If listeners don't know what I'm referring to, Mark Zuckerberg released a video this week where he, said that Meta and Facebook and Instagram and Threads are embracing free speech. And that means that there are going to be a whole load of changes to how they approach content moderation. People will remember that back around between 2016, 2018, those years, Facebook was really under fire for its policies and made a number of changes then and, in early 2020 as well, as we were seeing the response to COVID and the misinformation that was happening on there, not to mention January 6th and how it had to respond to that. And so, Mark Zuckerberg now says that the fact-checking operation, the paltry one that was happening at Meta is now being replaced with a community notes features similar to what Elon Musk's X has. He says that fact-checkers are politically biased, and as a result, content moderators will be moving, the ones that are in the US at least, from California to Texas, because we know that they have others in other parts of the world. And he says that will reduce the concerns of bias, as though there's no bias in Texas, just in California, right? You would know that firsthand, Brian.
Yeah.
Just a few other things there. Like he says that content rules around topics like immigration and gender will be removed. So now, your racist migration discourses and your hate speech against trans people are all fine again. Political content is coming back in a more vigorous way, or a more acceptable way, I guess, meaning there's more right-wing bile that's going to be going around. And I think, one of the big things, of course, that is in the video that maybe might not stand out as much as in the responses, but Zuckerberg said that Facebook or Meta or whatever will be working closely with the Trump administration to make sure that other governments who try to bring in censorship, as he says, but what he really means is regulations against social media and American tech companies, will be kind of like vigorously fought by the US government. So, I think it really, as we start 2025, it's a good picture of what this year is going to look like as tech embraces Donald Trump.
Yeah, and that's why this is a sort of a good story to, I think, kick us off and to think about all of these trend lines that are going to be sort of so front and center in 2025, which is really just kind of an autocratic shift and a more nakedly one among sort of the tech CEOs, among sort of aspiring founders and their sycophants, and sort of this sort of throwing to the wind, these past even gestures towards sort of democratization or to sort of serving the public good. I mean, we've talked a lot last year, at the end of last year, about Elon Musk as being sort of the most sort of flagrant and unabashed and aggressive driver of sort of nakedly right-wing politics in tech. But he really sort of has set the example. And the Zuckerberg story, I think, is important because it shows that another tech giant is all too happy to just sort of follow suit and really mimic all of those behaviors right down to the free speech rhetoric. The thing that is especially galling is that, a lot of critics and sort of liberals last year and the year before, when Musk was making these moves on Twitter and X, were kind of, laughing at him, saying like, oh yeah, like free speech, haha. And I think myself included, like I didn't, I think take seriously enough the fact that this could wind up being a real central sort of bastion of right-wing power and propaganda, which it really is more than anything now. It's a propaganda tool. And we'll talk a little bit later, I think, about the ways that it can be used all over the place.
I think just to pick up on that point, I think it's really striking to see, like, you mentioned how these things were framed, right? And how people were talking about Musk. It was last year, wasn't it, that there was all this talk about the potential cage match between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. And, as people fled away from X, going to Threads and acting like Threads was this kind of paradise away from the kind of swamp that X had become, and that Mark Zuckerberg was this kind of better tech billionaire, which was wild to even think that that was a discourse for a while because he had like rebranded himself.
Right. He was wearing cool clothes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or cool, quote, cool. You can't see, but I'm doing heavy air quotes here. Yeah.
Gold chains, he's a cool dude, right? But this kind of like framing of like Elon Musk versus Mark Zuckerberg, and how, that has really led us to these people are on the same side. They were always on the same side. Mark Zuckerberg only launched Threads because he saw market opportunity in what was happening, but it was never like this better Twitter or something.
No, and it's so clear now. It's just like Zuckerberg's just like, oh, this is an option, right? You can just say fuck you to everybody who stands in your way, and you can just kind of like make fun of them on social media and sort of cozy up to a strong man or would be autocrat. Cool, like I'll just do it that way.
Yeah.
That way I don't have to pay content moderators all over the place. That way I don't have to expend all this extra labor. I can just kind of streamline my operation and call it free speech. Great. Yeah, I don't care if Elon Musk called me a cuck in public or whatever. Like this is much better.
It also seems pretty clear that like I think Zuckerberg has had a realignment as well. Ostensibly, like he used to support some more progressive policies and like want to see certain positive, like at least social changes in the world. And there has been some reporting over the past number of months, I guess, over the past year that really suggests that he was kind of pissed off that he like didn't get credit for some investments that he made and like philanthropic contributions that he had made, in particular through, I think it's the Zuckerberg Chan Initiative, if I remember correctly, the name of that. And maybe there was some other donations too. And as well as like still being criticized when Facebook or Meta, kind of made these content moderation changes. And it seemed like the reporting suggested that he was like, oh, well, we did a few things and people still got mad at us. So I'm just going to embrace the right. And you know,
Same as it ever
yeah,
was, right? Like, it's just
yeah,
like all these people come, like Kara Swisher and like Ro Khanna coming on that like round table saying like, well, we should have just been nicer to Elon Musk. And then maybe he wouldn't have turned to the right if we just sort of like given him more sort of praise. And if we haven't lavished him with even more subsidies, then we should have just like kissed the ring even harder. And then maybe they
yeah.
would have
Keep
liked
fawning
us.
all over him, and then everything would have been fine.
It's pathetic, but it's also just such a perfect encapsulation of why it's such a disaster to have handed so much power over our digital lives, over our digital infrastructures to these billionaire run enterprises. Like it or not, Meta and Facebook undergird a large portion of the web. People use Facebook for so many purposes, for event planning, for, social networking, obviously, for staying in touch, for communications. And like now more than ever, it's clear that, and Facebook is even worse than some of these other, I mean, not worse than X because, Musk is just, in total control there too. But, because of the sort of board organization that Peter Thiel helped Zuckerberg organize at Facebook, there's not even really a board that could push back on him if they didn't like what he was doing and try to oust him. He has kind of sole power in this unique arrangement as CEO. You can't get rid of Zuckerberg. So we really do have this sort of authoritarian social network that is Facebook and all of the sort of meta offspring that it has. And pushing back on it is going to be even more challenging. And now it's just, I mean, Facebook is already just like comically a cesspool with all of the sort of, conspiracy theory, like boomer content, and now AI slop. And, it's just, I think we're going to really see in 2025, Facebook and Zuckerberg like push the outer bounds of that. Like, how bad can they make it? How much shit can they flood the zone with before like there's any kind of user rebellion? Will there be any kind of user rebellion, or how much will we put up with? Is it like X where maybe there are some limits and some people honestly, like I thought that I would never stop using X just because I was like kind of entrenched there. I kind of stopped using it. It's so shitty that it's just like I don't even want to look at it. It's just like not even politically. It's just like I'm just getting shit that doesn't have anything to do with my interest.
I pop in there a bit, but like I'm mainly on Blue Sky these days. But I do feel like the Facebook user base is like very locked in a way that the Threads one probably isn't. And I feel like the Instagram one is even like kind of locked into a certain degree when you think about that type of video platform, especially if TikTok is banned in the United States, then like that's kind of the only main alternative that people have for those, right? And so I do wonder the degree to which people can like move away from it. But to pick up on the broader point you were making there, I feel like when we think about the past, because this isn't the first time that Facebook or Meta or Mark Zuckerberg have been making decisions that have been in the interests of the right-wing conservative users that are using the platform in response to political energy or political pressure that was being applied to them. If we think back a number of years ago, there were a number of stories about how Meta was resistant to banning, say, Alex Jones from its platform, of course, to removing Donald Trump, to actually taking action to remove a number of like right-wing groups and extreme right-wing groups that were using its platform to organize and to spread disinformation, whatever you want to call it, and those sorts of things. Back in that moment, there was this discussion of like, is it Mark Zuckerberg who is actually making these decisions, or is it people behind the scenes who, are more kind of like politically motivated who are doing this? People like Joel Kaplan, who was a Republican operative who was hired by Facebook and for a while was the vice president of global public policy. And, there used to be reporting in BuzzFeed News, for example, about how he was stifling a lot of attempts to rein in hate speech and, to rein in some of these issues or what a lot of people perceived as issues that Facebook was dealing with. And he was making sure that those things were not done because it would have, targeted and removed things that right-wing groups were doing there. And I think right now what we see is Joel Kaplan has just been elevated to president of global affairs, a position that used to be held by Nick Clegg, who was a deputy prime minister in the UK, head of the Liberal Democrat Party over there. And so because of the changing political winds in the United States, I think it's no surprise that you see this Republican operative being elevated. But if back then there were questions as to, is this really what Mark Zuckerberg believes in, or is he just, adopting these things to try to avoid scrutiny or pushback because he has this Republican who is suggesting he do these things? I think this time it's very clear that Mark Zuckerberg is the driving force, is totally on board with making these right-wing changes, supports them, whether it's just because he's cutting labor costs, but I think also because his personal politics have shifted, where he doesn't want to see his power and authority be challenged, where he, doesn't want to be taxed more. He wants to own his island over in Hawaii and, have no people getting mad at him for that, and just like these other billionaires, to have his power, to wield influence, to, not be held to account. And he sees the opportunity to do that through supporting Republicans through that cause. And also, of course, he's embraced the community with the UFC. Of course, Dana White, who, is the head of the UFC, has joined Meta's board and is a big Trump supporter. So he's also in these circles that are much more kind of right wing, much more pro Trump than maybe he used to be. And I think that this is also an important dynamic of how things have shifted at Meta too.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would at least sort of just note that, this interest in progressive causes has very likely always been kind of shallow at best. If anything, as we've talked about a little bit on the show, yeah, for sure. Going back to the late 2000s when Facebook and Google and the big sort of Web 1.0 survivors and Web 2.0 sort of upstarts were really sort of becoming behemoths. The way they did that was by voicing, a progressive kind of mindset that aligned with sort of what was sort of widely accepted to be kind of a, progress, future, sort of like the Obama mindset kind of really. And that was kind of the way that you signaled that you were part of, building a quote better future, or he liked to say you were connecting people. But it was also just by playing nice with Obama and with progressive governments at the time, you also like very conveniently ingratiated yourself to politicians that might otherwise have an interest in regulating you. So yeah, so we've talked about that a little bit, but that was in vogue, and that was also a way to minimize oversight and minimize regulation. So it was always just kind of this like shallow veneer, and if you don't get enough credit for it, and you like if you're willing to turn hard to the right and add Dana White to your board. And let's not forget, Peter Thiel was always there. Peter Thiel's been at Facebook from the start. So it's not that like you could really have this like sincere dedication to progressive causes if you're like, well, I didn't get enough credit for it, so now I'm MAGA.
Well, it's like even in that era that Zuckerberg is talking about, right? When he says that he's pissed off that he didn't get like credit for, this philanthropy that he was doing. One of the big things that they were funding was education privatization in the United States, like charter schools and stuff, right?
Yeah, that was like Priscilla Chan's big thing. And it really has sort of, I think, culminated now in this point where Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, now, and to a lesser extent, even all the other tech companies that are sending millions of dollars to Trump. It's like a historic amount, not just the tech companies, but corporate America has now sent like $200 million to Trump's inauguration fund.
And to be clear, it's like all these companies or CEOs or whatnot are giving like $1 million donations to the inauguration fund.
Right.
Like, sure, it's positioned as this thing that they commonly do, but it's like this is their way to buy influence and to show that they're on board.
Exactly. It's way more than even Trump's last time, which I think was notable for being sort of outsized. So yeah, it's like it's a way that they know that they can kind of pledge fealty to the administration.
Not to mention them all going to dinner at Mar-a-Lago. There was this report that even Bill Gates was trying to like get an invite to go. Recently, all the CEOs have been through, but Bill Gates is, positioned as the good billionaire, the philanthropist helping people, blah, blah, blah. But he wants to go have his chat, have his chin wag.
He wanted in. Yeah. I mean, it really does signal, like, I think more than ever before. I mean, you pretty convincingly argue that we've been on this path for quite some time, but like this does feel like a turning point where it's, especially with, Musk over the holidays, wielding his power to sort of just, use X to get a government spending bill upturned just kind of by tweeting.
Because it's too long, right? It was too many pages.
Oh, yeah, it was all these things. He had, like, this litany of, like, bizarre grievances, only a small fraction of which could even credibly be said to have anything resembling the truth regarding to it. But, like, yeah, we have this we're with this moment where a threshold has been crossed, and we are looking at the emergence of, like, a bona fide oligarchy, and it's led by, the tech giants, which are our largest corporations, our most valuable, largest market capped corporations. And this is just how it happens. Like, it's a different veneer, it's a different structure. These are technology companies. It's not like Gazprom. So, like, they have products that are sold on the consumer marketplace, but they are functioning now like an old school oligarchy where the unelected owner of a company, our richest man, can just kind of weigh in on politics and get his way nakedly, right? Like, this isn't even backroom dealing. This is just like as flagrantly undemocratic as you could possibly have it. Say, I don't like this. And then, of course, it comes out a few days later that at the core of Elon's complaint was that there would have been some restrictions or injurious provisions on his business dealings in China, which were removed conveniently from that spending, but from the version of the bill that ultimately did pass. So he does have these vested interests, and he's just sort of weighing in, and he doesn't have to hide anything. He doesn't have to hire lobbyists. He just has to tweet. And it's pretty wild. It's like a very sort of almost American version of this hypercharged, hyper-capitalist oligarchy that we're seeing just kind of ascend. And it's going to be, I think, the key story of 2025 is how that power works, how other tech companies aspire to grab it, aspire to wield it. And meanwhile, the world is literally burning, and we have no interest in doing anything about that, saving the people on the ground, as long as sort of the richest can get their way and they can shape the narrative to their whims. And, the media sort of flocks to it. Musk just has to turn to Twitter. He just has to yell on Twitter. And it's a lot. I think Democrats obviously are completely ill-equipped to deal with this. What have they done over the break? Well, they've kind of given out some presidential medals of honor to Bono or whatever. Like, that's what they were spending their time doing, not opposing any of this.
Well, and the media had like a love fest earlier this week, the liberal media, MSNBC and places like that, when the election got certified and Kamala Harris oversaw the certification of the election of the guy who, they were saying for the past year or so was going to end democracy. So,
right. It's like, democracy still works. It's like, does it?
Yeah.
Does it? Does it?
Look at how well they ushered in the supposed end of democracy. Good job,
wow.
guys. Yeah.
Well, look how democratically one party handed over power to the party that explicitly wants to end democracy. Wow. Yeah, great.
I love the norms.
Yeah, I love the norms. Love the standards. Oh, man.
But I think like everything that you said there is so well put and really shows us really what we're dealing with heading into 2025. And I would say, one of the narratives for the past few months has been, this is clearly all going to blow up really soon. Trump and Musk are obviously going to get into a fight, and that these two egomaniacs can't possibly work together. And I feel like this kind of fighting match over immigration over the holidays really showed us how solid it is, where Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy came out in support of the H-1B visa in particular, which a lot of tech companies use to get the labor that they need into the country.
Yeah, just to explain real quickly what that was. So if everybody wasn't online over the break, as I hope you all were not, getting your rest for this delightful year to come. But yeah, so there was this fight that sort of broke out between different factions in MAGA world over immigration, right? And Ramaswamy and Elon Musk both came out in favor of the H-1B visa, which is especially used by tech companies to get sort of skilled foreign workers into the country and working at tech companies. And meanwhile, the other MAGA faction, sort of led by Laura Loomer and I think Stephen Miller and these guys.
And this is like the kind of hardcore MAGA base as well.
Which this has been Trump's message. So from a logical standpoint, it's on there that you would think that sort of ideologically speaking, that the party would be aligned with the ones saying like, well, we just sort of won this election by screaming about immigration and, making this very racist plea to get migrant workers out of the country to do these mass deportations, the subtext being that of America first, of course, that it's white America first. And so they're kind of shocked that this idea that, well, no, we're going to keep some skilled migrant workers because we need them to run our businesses. So they're saying like, no, this wasn't the program, the Stephen Miller camp and Laura Loomer.
And the pitch of the tech folks was very much like, we need our H-1B visas, but yeah, you can do whatever you want with the rest of them. Like, we just need our bunch, right?
God, it's so naked and it's so ugly, especially because Musk himself spends so much time on Twitter railing against immigrants and immigration and supporting the cause of deportation. But not these workers, not the ones that he needs to run his companies. And once again, Musk is, as the richest and arguably most powerful person in the world now, in this position where he can dispense with any pretense. He says, no, I need these ones. I need these workers. Like, I don't care if it illustrates how phony the dichotomy really is. Because the truth, of course, is that, even, the Republican business owners who support Trump, many of them rely on migrant workforces to keep costs low at their businesses. And you bet your ass there's going to be a scrambling from every different industry that does to exempt their workforces from any sort of coming deportation program. This is just sort of the first volley, and Musk is in a position where he can just yell it out on Twitter and create this rift. And then the telling part, as you were saying, is that Trump just kind of went like, no, Musk is right. Because, of course, he doesn't really care. He'll side with capital. He sides with the power. He sides with the wealthiest person in the world. And so now we know how this is going to work. And not only that is he just siding with capital and with where he perceives the locus of power to be, but he's also showing that he's also kind of comfortable deferring to Elon Musk. Because I think we're already starting to see that be sort of one sort of resistance tactic, is to sort of kind of try to embarrass Trump by saying like, oh, well, Elon Musk is the one in power and Trump is maybe he's older, maybe he's just sort of like detached in his own stuff, or who knows. But at least this time he didn't care. He was just like, we'll do what Elon wants.
Yeah, I think it really shows that, if we were hoping, or if people were hoping for there to be this big rift between these two big narcissists, I think, it's quite possible we're going to be waiting a while for that to happen, because there are clear interests on both sides for these people to work together to advance a particular program that they both want to see realized, right? And for Trump to like be able to be the figurehead and be the president and get the kind of praise of at least part of the American population who really doesn't care so much about what he's doing as long as he's in power and like saying the right things that they want to hear. And the one other thing I would add on that too, which I think is really interesting, is Electrek, which used to be like basically an Elon Musk fan blog. Had an interesting report about how earlier last year now, Tesla laid off 15,000 people. At the same time as it did that, it was applying for thousands more H-1B visas to bring in lower cost workers to replace those people. So the idea that they just need to bring in this kind of foreign workforce, because these skills aren't available in the United States, is not exactly accurate.
Oh, totally BS. Yeah, no, we need to be clear about that, is that, these tech companies are and have been for the last few years engaging in mass layoffs. There is an available pool of workers, of skilled workers that tech companies can use, that a company like Tesla could use. With H-1B visa workers, they just get more control. These are employees that now are utterly dependent on this working arrangement to sort of to stay in the country, to protect their families. And so it's, Bernie Sanders sort of weighed in on this on Twitter as well, and he got some flack for it. But he's right. This is a workforce that's being exploited by magnates like Musk for this purpose. Obviously a lot of the sort of discourse around it and the way that it's engaged by the right, especially by folks like Laura Loomer, who just have these histories of being blatant sort of racists and xenophobes, is being engaged in for the wrong reasons. They just don't want any brown people in the country at all. But what Bernie Sanders and folks are saying is that like what the tech companies are doing are importing a labor class that they can control and that they can pay less, they can subject to worse conditions, and that, yeah, it's still an opportunity for some of those workers, perhaps, but let's not have any illusions about why the tech CEOs like this program. It's not out of benevolence or of a need to fill a specific kind of role that they can't fill with American workers. It's because they get all these benefits.
Yeah, a lot of the workers who, were left at Twitter after mass layoffs and telling people that they could leave if they wanted to were H-1B workers who, didn't have much other choice, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that, all of this sort of ceding of control over these companies, over these platforms to, very narrow interests and to have like sole proprietorship, basically sole control, has a real impact. And we saw that, as we talked about, sort of Elon Musk tanking this bipartisan spending bill that would have funded the government, making sure a version that was more amenable to his interests passed ultimately. But we also just see it in the way that Musk is beginning to sort of wield power politically abroad, in Germany and the UK, where he's just been outspoken in his support of far right nationalist, sometimes actually like neo-Nazi parties, and having a real impact. Right? Like the conditions on these platforms have also been degraded, right? And that we're firing moderators, we're getting rid of governance that's flooded with people who have really abject political views and are free to harass, free to promote racism, free to do all these things. And it's in the meanwhile sort of gutting the press. And what does Musk always say? He's like, don't listen to the media, just come to X, where it's all happening.
That's where you get the real news.
Yeah, that's where you get the real news that's happening on X. Never mind that like most of those people are like commenting on a third hand post that they encountered about another news story, or just like opining,
or just spreading total bullshit,
right?
Yeah.
And now Facebook is going to undergo a similar transformation, more so than it already has, to the point where, social media sort of is like this incubator of like the drone conspiracies like we saw over Christmas break, which that's weird. And that's all gone, right? Yeah. I don't know if our listeners are probably familiar with this story of like New Jersey, all these like drones were being spotted in the sky, and that these stories spread on X, on social media, because people were just posting blurry images saying like, look at that, what are all these, and like half of them just turned out to be constellations or planes.
But like it shows how easily these platforms, especially how they're set up now, can like just allow these conspiracies to just spread and go everywhere, and so many people to buy into them, to the degree that like the mainstream media, CNN and stuff, were reporting on all this stuff as though it was worthy of talking about.
Yep, there's enough posts,
and as though it was a real concern and not just some bullshit being spread online.
Which, wild. Like, we've now, since we're on to the next thing, like nobody's talking about it anymore, but like that's all that it turned out to be. It wasn't like, oh well, let's do something about all these drones. It's like, oh well, that maybe was just like a social media hysteria that just kind of eventually became uninteresting, so we've all moved on. But that it kind of like turns out that that's basically what that was. And again, we're kind of talking about looking forward to 2025. Just, you have to now sort of keep in mind that this is going to be the baseline, where there are fewer controls, there's fewer people doing content moderation, there's fewer guardrails against stuff just kind of going wildly off track and just sort of, going in whichever direction. So, I mean, that's why I got to be honest, there's a few times over the break where I just like kind of like sunk into a deep funk, where I was just kind of like, we are in this really unique place now where, we rely so much on these digital infrastructures to get our information. People do around the world. Liberals and conservatives alike always complained about the institution's content moderation efforts and that kind of thing. But we're starting to see what not having any, or not having any credible ones, what that looks like. And this is being paired with a moment, not coincidentally, when the people that own these companies are wielding more power than ever, and openly and nakedly wielding that power more openly than ever. And so as our journalistic institutions that once would have supplied some of, that credible information is being gutted, is being torn asunder, it's being replaced by these bullshit generators. And at the same time, as people like Musk and Zuckerberg are wealthier than ever, more powerful than ever, and exerting their influence more openly than ever, this is what our landscape looks like in 2025. And it's imperative that we start thinking about ways to sort of resist that, to push back on that. And the funk that I fell into was just, I think, a result of recognizing the enormity of that challenge and how kind of unprepared and how sapped we are like right now. I'm not, you can mock the quote resistance all you want on, that took root after Trump's first election, but it was something, and it signaled that there was an appetite and an energy that could be directed towards pushing back. And this time it's a lot of fumbling. I'm sure we're going to get to work. I'm sure that there is going to be, an effort that takes shape, and many, many efforts. Many already are. It's just more disorganized right now. It's less visible. We're unsure of how to wield all this stuff. But yeah, it felt especially bleak with, especially seeing sort of the collapse of journalism. Layoffs at the Washington Post this week, as a cartoonist quit because a cartoon that criticized Musk and Bezos was rejected on grounds of its content. So she resigned. It's not a newspaper with truly free, protected editorial standards anymore. My former paper, the Los Angeles Times, is being kind of explicitly transformed into a more conservative organ as the billionaire owner intervenes there. So yeah, all of these winds are blowing together into one of the most, I think, challenging and dispiriting moments I think that we've ever stared down. And there is hope, I think, because there's still so many people out there who are willing to fight, but it's tough. I say as I
Yeah.
look out my hazy wildfire-strewn window.
No, I feel that a lot, man. And, it's not only like the decimation of journalism and these institutions that like there was still some value in them, even if they were imperfect. But it's like if you visit a Meta platform in Canada right now and you try to read some news, you'll just be hit by a big, notice saying you can't access this in Canada because the government tried to force Meta to pay some money to fund journalism to support it, right? And I think it brings us back right to the beginning when I was talking about that video that Zuckerberg put out, where the big piece of it that I feel like wasn't in a lot of the coverage that we saw was his statement that, Meta and that the Trump administration are going to be explicitly pushing back on other governments that try to rein them in, and that try to enforce some degree of standards. And so, yes, we're seeing this very big fight in the United States, but we're all going to be facing it, especially if seeing what is happening with these tech companies, governments outside the US try to push back on this as well. So, even if you're not in the United States and, you're watching what's happening there from abroad, this is still a fight that we are all in because it's not just going to stay in the United States. And as you were saying with what Elon Musk is doing in Germany and the UK, we're already seeing this spread. And so I think that is something that we need to keep in mind. It's not just an American problem.
Not just an American problem. It's not just a user problem. This is a problem that's increasingly extending to like the people who work at these companies who previously were able to have some say, whether it's by organizing protests or sort of just pushing back internally. Well, the appetite for that has dried up too. We saw Google firing and Microsoft firing workers who are protesting, the tech companies partnering with Israel and selling technology to the IDF. And just this week, we saw Meta employees who are speaking out internally on like an internal platform, an internal server, just sort of expressing their discontent with like the rightward drift of the company hiring Dana White, this UFC MAGA guy, and its move to fire all its content moderators. They silenced them internally. 404 Media has a good story about that. They shut it down and said these employees were violating an policy. So these companies are just trying to crush any sort of effort to even speak out, to push back. It really is. For a long time, something like this would have sounded a little bit hyperbolic, but this really is an autocratic drift. It really is the formation of an oligarchic Silicon Valley, I think, that we're seeing, especially with its coziness with the Trump administration. This is a moment unlike many we've seen. And I would add also to what you said that the crazy thing to me, and I was just on BBC the other night talking about this, is that Musk now, he's had a taste for his power, right? And I think probably Zuckerberg's soon too. Bezos has been emboldened, but Musk, he's the pioneer here. He's the one who's in the captain's seat, and he's witnessed now how just by tweeting shit out, he can get a response and he can get politicians to kind of fall in line or come, begging for his support. He is now just sort of like firing off his opinions and political ideas, even in places where it's not explicitly clear that he has a commercial interest, like the UK, where he's sort of waded into the whole Tommy Robinson and this scandal over Keir Starmer. He's really fanned the flames on a number of conspiracy theories, misinformation, and really contributed to some political instability there.
And is hosting like a Twitter live stream or X live stream or whatever with the head of the Alternative for Deutschland, like the neo-Nazi party that, yeah.
Neo-Nazi party of Germany. And he can move the Overton window because he does still have people that sort of believe that he's just this innovating tech guy. And that's one of my big questions for 2025 is whether like the media, the remaining media institutions that are capable of shaping the discourse in any way are going to be willing to come out as they somewhat did in, 2017 and say like, actually, this guy's motivations are just kind of being an asshole, being racist, like having fascistic shaped ambitions. Like, you could see what's in common with all these things. Oh, he likes the neo-Nazi party in Germany. Oh, he likes Tommy Robinson, like the ultra white nationalist reform party guy who's too racist for even, most of the conservative British politicians to want to associate with. Oh, he hates migration here in the United States. Like, oh, his Tesla factories have been sued over and over for being hotbeds of anti-black racism. Like, let's put this puzzle together. Like, what is motivating this guy? I wonder if the media is going to wake up a little bit around that. But yeah, it is. That's what's kind of, again, freaky and somewhat unprecedented is that now he commands this much power. He can just tweet shit and he can sort of just cause a train wreck in national politics wherever he points his posts, so to speak.
Yeah, it's very concerning, something that we're going to be watching.
In Canada, right?
Yeah, and on that high note, let's pivot to some final stories of the week that stood out. I guess where you mentioned Canada, we can start with the fact that, I don't know if you've noticed, but the 51st state, as Donald Trump has been calling it, has lost its prime minister or its governor. Justin Trudeau has resigned. There's a lot of things I could say about that, obviously. But I think for a tech show, for me, Justin Trudeau really stands out as like a politician who was kind of made in the social media era, like had a certain degree of celebrity and took advantage of those platforms. And, in the past few years has really seen social media turn on him and kind of create this real anger toward him that sometimes isn't even really founded on a whole lot, but has been able to spread there and has really made it so that his government really has not been able to get over it. And it has really stifled its ability to do very much lately. Yeah. And so it's just kind of wild to see in the middle of everything that is going on, Justin Trudeau is out, and we'll have to see what happens. But it looks like we're heading in your direction with an extreme right-wing government later this year.
I think I saw Musk tweeting in favor of that candidate already, or tweeting admiringly.
Pierre Poilievre, yeah,
right.
The leader of the Conservative Party. And he was on the Jordan Peterson show just last week talking about, basically repeating a lot of these things, talking about how racism was invented and imported into Canada because it didn't exist before the past couple of decades, apparently. And it's just a product of wokeism.
Yep, checks out. Yep.
Yeah. This is the kind of stuff we're dealing with. And of course, AI data centers will be a great way to sell more natural gas to power them, more fossil fuels from Alberta, of course. So this is the kind of,
for the silver
this
lining.
is the direction we're heading.
Great, very innovative. Yeah.
Terrible news. But, in other news, did you see this TechCrunch report? I guess, Sam Altman has been talking about it as well. ChatGPT Pro, the $200 a month subscription to the chatbot, is still not profitable. So even if you pay $200 a month, they're still not making money.
Yeah. Well, to be fair to I think it's actually a really telling story. It's really interesting. But anyone who pays $200 a month to use ChatGPT is going to be using it a lot. So I think that's what is really undergirding that story, is that it's just like these power users are just drilling different prompts in there and just sort of, overworking the compute. But yeah, I mean, what a telling story, right? Even at that price point, it's not profitable primarily because, yeah, it just uses so much compute. It uses so much energy. And, I have some skepticism that they're even pricing in energy costs into the way that they're modeling their business. I think that's one thing that I'm really interested in because, again, they don't have to be transparent about it. So they might just be talking about sort of the compute cost that it's incurring, which is pretty wild. So really telling story there. Also in other Altman news, and maybe we'll do our bonus episode this month on Altman's latest sort of manifesto, which is really quietly yet another call for more investment, because he said, oh, we didn't, he says, I think AGI is going to be possible. We see the pathway now. We're going to have like AGI like agents like coming out this year, but full AGI is just on the horizon. It's just costing more than we thought. And so we're just going to, to me, it just reads like either they're sort of setting the stage for what they hope will be an IPO, or it'll be yet another round of investment or seeking investment to keep the wheels on the whole operation.
The tech paradise is always right around the corner.
Always. So close.
Yeah, we talked about this last year, so I just wanted to provide a little update. And, it relates to what I was just saying about Meta, but Google has finally delivered its $100 million to the collective that represents, Canadian media organizations in response to this law from the Canadian government saying that Google and Meta needed to contribute to Canadian journalism. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see the impact of that over the next little while. Of course, California tried something similar and the outcome was not so great.
Crash and burn.
Yeah, I guess we'll see how this works in Canada and whether a potential future conservative government would even keep something like that on the books. So yeah, just wanted to throw that update in there.
Hey, a little sliver of good news, a little bit of a win in a year that has otherwise begun with a massive climate change instigated wildfire. And we've gone the entire episode without mentioning this truly symbolic, I think, event in which the driver of a Cybertruck parked the said Cybertruck in front of a Trump hotel in Vegas and blew it up. I think he took his own life in the process. I think there was some speculation at first that this was maybe another Luigi Mangione type effort to, call attention to the forces that are oppressing humanity. And yet it turned out that he was a mentally ill Elon Musk and Trump fan. And I guess this was supposed to be a celebration, a demonstration of fealty, or like where we should go, or just to celebrate them. And it's just, I think that just adds yet another layer, another symbolic layer that just speaks to our moment in such a profound way, that their supporters here, like even their supporters, are prone to taking this like violent action and destroying these emblems of our moment, and yet that signify so much, right? We have the Cybertruck on the horizon. We have Trump Towers. We have all of this just kind of being engulfed into this chaotic swirl, being like bound together. And this poor kind of hapless service member who clearly had some mental issues, believing in their power in one way or another, being deluded to believe this. And to me, that just shows, the immensity of these forces. I think that now it's maybe no hyperbole to say that humanity is up against. So I hope we make it in 2025.
Yeah, it was quite a striking image to start the year of the burning Cybertruck in front of the Trump hotel. But that is our first episode of the year in the bag. I think setting the stage for what a year this is going to be, unfortunately. But I should say that we have a lot of interesting episodes planned. We're hoping to have some guests on to dig into some really key issues that, in some cases maybe don't get the attention that they deserve right now, like the gig economy, and others like AI that, are right in our face, but maybe we need to do a deep dive to drill down on what is going on there. So Stay tuned for more great episodes over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I'm so excited about everything we're going to get into, generative AI and labor and the gig economy, where it stands, but nobody's talking about it. We're going to talk about it. 2025. Yeah, of course, we have big tech and the monopolies, and we're going to be covering Musk and Trump, of course. And I will be less scattered, I promise. I will not always be recording on a day in which I am just returning from like delivering water to my son's school because I can't go outside today. Yeah, it is wild times, and I hope we can avert further system crash, or begin to, in 2025. What do you think about that, Paris? How does that sound?
I hope so too. Let's do it, man.
Till next time.
Till next time. System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Eric Wickham. Our theme music is Dystopia by our good friends in Yacht. Support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get a monthly bonus episode.